The prairie didn't speak in words, but it remembered everything. Each blade of grass swayed with the breath of the dead. The sky above was too wide, too blue, like it had forgotten what sorrow looked like. But the wind knew. The wind carried it, and one man, riding alone beneath that sky, knew it too. He didn't ride for company anymore, or for trade, or for God. He rode to feel the ache in his knees and the pull in his chest, reminders that he was still alive, though sometimes he wished he wasn't. They called him the Silent One, when they called him anything at all, middle-aged, hardened, by years and sun. His beard came in gray now, his eyes didn't blink much, and his cabin sat so far from town you'd forget it existed, just like they'd forgotten him. But the land hadn't, and on one particular dusk, when the shadows stretched like old scars across the earth, he saw something that made him stop there. By the edge of a dried creek bed stood a sycamore, crooked, half dead, with something swaying beneath its limbs. At first, it looked like cloth, but cloth doesn't bleed. He dismounted, slow and deliberate, boots crunching dry earth. His hand hovered near the old pistol he hadn't fired in 6 years. The closer he got, the heavier the silence pressed against him. Then he saw her, a girl, maybe 17. Apache, by the look of her dark braids and sun-browned skin. She hung not by the neck, but by the wrists, bound high and cruel, as though someone wanted her to die slow. Flies danced at her brow. Blood ran down her arms and pooled at her bare feet. Above her, nailed to the bark, was a jagged scrap of wood. White man don't forgive. He stood there a long while, long enough for the wind to shift, long enough for memory to stir like smoke from a snuffed flame. He should have walked away, should have let the world finish what it had started. But something about her stillness, something about the way she didn't struggle, didn't cry, broke something brittle in his chest. He pulled out his knife, cut the ropes with hands that trembled. She crumpled like a bird with shattered wings. He carried her like you carry something sacred, not out of worship, but out of guilt. Back to the cabin, back through thickets of pine and hollow quiet, while the sun spilled gold behind them like blood from a wound too wide. He didn't speak to her. She didn't open her eyes. By nightfall, she lay beneath buffalo hides on the cot once shared with a woman now long dead. He lit a lamp but left it low, drew water, washed her wrists. She didn't stir. He sat in the rocker by the fire, staring at nothing. The logs crackled. His bones ached, and for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not to save her, but to be forgiven if she died here. Days passed. She didn't speak. He didn't push. She woke once, screaming, fists clenched tight like they still held on to those ropes. He didn't move toward her, just said softly, "It's gone now." She watched him with eyes that had seen more than any child ever should. Her body healed slowly, her spirit slower still. She wouldn't eat if he watched, wouldn't sleep unless the fire burned low. Sometimes, he'd find her sitting outside, barefoot, staring at the moon as if asking it why it hadn't helped. He built her a stool to sit on. She carved strange little patterns into it with a shard of broken antler. The winter came down early that year. Snow kissed the window panes and the wind howled like wolves mourning their young. She began stacking wood by the door without being asked, sewing small repairs into the old blanket. Still no words. He started talking anyway, not to her, just into the air, telling stories of the land, of his horse's stubbornness. Of the time the roof collapsed in spring rain. She never replied, but she stayed in the room when he spoke. That was something. One evening, he found her tracing the rim of a tin cup, eyes distant. He asked, gently, "What's your name?" She didn't answer, just stared harder at the cup, like it could protect her, so he never asked again. He didn't name her either. To name something is to claim it, and she didn't belong to anyone, not anymore. In town, when he traded for salt and flour, he heard them whisper. Heard, he's keeping one of them. Best keep your sons away from that place. That's trouble, waiting to boil. He ignored them, always had, but that night, he came home and sharpened the axe. Not because he planned to use it, just because it felt good to hold something strong in his hands. Snow deepened. She began to hum, soft and low, songs he'd never heard, songs older than any flag. He didn't ask what they meant. Sometimes, the most sacred things don't need translating. One morning, she stepped out barefoot into the snow. He followed her quietly from the porch. She walked to the tree line, dug her hands into the powder, found a flat stone. She knelt, placed it in the earth, and pressed her forehead to it. Then she stood, turned back, and met his gaze for the first time, truly met it. Something passed between them in that glance. Not words, not forgiveness, but maybe a beginning. That night, she placed a carved bird made from pine on the table, its wings outstretched, its head tilted skyward. He picked it up, turned it in his hand. He looked at her. She just nodded once, then returned to her quiet. He didn't ask what it meant, but when she left the room, he held it close to his chest and didn't let go until sleep took him. The land was still cruel, the people still crueler, but inside that cabin, beneath the rafters and the fire's slow breathing, something had shifted, not healed, not yet, but warmed, and sometimes warmth is how redemption begins. The storm came in, not with thunder, but with silence. Snow fell slow and heavy, blanketing the world like a white shroud, muffling even the thoughts in a man's head. Inside the cabin, the girl sat near the fire with her legs folded beneath her, braiding the mane of an old straw doll she'd pieced together from broom threads and pine scraps. Her face was calmer now, not at peace. Not yet, but quiet, like a wound that had stopped bleeding. The rancher, leaning by the window, watched the flakes fall against the pane. He didn't speak, though he longed to. His voice felt heavy in his chest. He hadn't realized how much space silence could take until someone else shared it. She hadn't told him her name. He still hadn't asked again. Some truths, like seeds, only bloom if left undisturbed. That week, she started doing more around the place her way, not out of obedience or gratitude, just instinct. She cleaned the bridle bits until they shone, washed clothes in the stream with numb hands, mended the torn sleeve of his work shirt without a word. He didn't stop her, but he left her space, always a breath between them, a doorways, with a choice. One morning, she brought in firewood before he woke. Another evening, she placed a smooth stone on the hearth. No reason, just there, just present. But the ghosts weren't done whispering one night. By the flicker of firelight, she drew shapes in the ashes on the floor, circles, spirals, symbols older than his god. He watched from the rocker, didn't interrupt. She pressed her palm to the soot and then to her own chest. That's when he remembered the villages, the screaming, the flames rising like angry spirits. He remembered smoke and gunpowder, and children too small to understand war. He had ridden with the ones who did it. Maybe not her village, maybe not her family, but close enough. The next day, the preacher came. His voice always sounded too clean, like water that had never touched the earth. He sat on the porch, boots too polished for this dirt. Folks in town are stirring, he said. Heard talk of you keeping an Apache girl under your roof. The rancher didn't answer, just kept whittling the edge of a cedar stick. It's not safe for her. Or you, the preacher pressed. Some wounds run too deep. The war's not as gone as you think. The rancher looked up, eyes like flint. You believe in mercy, don't you? The preacher stood. I believe in order, in fences, in things where they belong. The door creaked open behind them. The girl stepped onto the porch, holding a bowl of water for the chickens. She didn't look at the preacher, but her presence was answer enough. He left with his hat pulled low and a warning in his eyes. The next few days were quieter than usual. The girl kept close to the window at night. She slept with her hand near the fireplace poker. She was no longer afraid. She was waiting. The rancher tried to speak with her one morning, chopping wood while she stacked it. "When I was your age," he said slowly, "I thought justice was something you could carry on a rifle." She didn't reply, but her hands paused over the logs. "Turns out, it don't weigh right. Not like grief does." She looked up then, just a flicker of eye contact, and for the first time, she asked softly, "You kill?" He didn't flinch. Yes, she didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't run, just nodded once and went back to stacking wood. A boy from town started visiting on his mule, barely 12, skin tanned from sun, with a gap-toothed smile and a kindness rare in boys his age. He brought dried beans, a few apples, and stories. He didn't flinch when he saw the girl. "My mama's Choctaw," he said proudly. "Says people only fear what they don't sit down with." The girl said nothing, but listened. Next time, he brought a book. Next time, she gave him a small braid of feathers tied in leather string. The rancher watched from the porch. Something about their quiet exchange made him ache, not from jealousy, but from the unfamiliar tug of hope. One afternoon, the girl began to speak in whispers, broken English woven with Apache. She told of a river where they used to bathe, of a flute her brother made from elk bone, of smoke and men's laughter, and a dog that died trying to protect her. She never named the men. Didn't need to. He knew the kind. He might have once ridden beside them. That night, by firelight, he finally said what had been heavy in him. "I was one of them. Not that day. Not your village. But somewhere else. Another place. Another fire." She didn't interrupt. "They told us we were cleaning the land. That Indians were the infection. I believed it. Until I watched a girl your age burned alive." He swallowed hard. "I still smell it sometimes, in the back of my throat." She didn't cry, but she looked at him like he was no longer a stranger. Just another broken piece of a broken world. A crow landed on the roof the next morning. The girl stepped outside and tossed it a few beans. It cawed once and flew off. She smiled. First time he'd seen it. It wasn't wide, but it was real. That day, she found a broken fiddle under the bed, his wife's. She strung it with thread and wire, tuning it by instinct. That night, she played a melody neither Apache nor white. Something in between, something new. But peace has a price in places like this, and the wind, once again, began to shift. They came at dusk. 3 riders, not outlaws, just men with hate in their mouths and too much whiskey in their blood. The boy from town warned them ahead of time, galloped hard to the ranch, and arrived breathless. "They're coming," said. "She don't belong here," said. "They'll burn it down if they have to." The rancher stood at the doorway, holding his old rifle. The girl stood beside him. He looked down at her. "You can go. I won't hold you here." She didn't blink. "This is my fire too." They waited together, but the men never came past the ridge. Maybe they saw the smoke from the chimney and thought twice. Maybe they didn't want to face a man who had nothing left to lose. Either way, they rode on, and the wind, just this once, softened. That night, she gave him something she had carved, a little wooden hand, palm open, with a crack down the center. She placed it in his palm. "Yours was broken," she whispered. "Now it holds mine." The next morning, she stepped outside in a deerskin cloak and buried her old doll in the snow. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because she no longer needed it to survive. She had survived. Inside the cabin, the rancher sat at the table, writing. In an old leather journal. He didn't write about war or guilt. He wrote about the way the fiddle sounded against snow light, the way she braided the horse's mane like a prayer, the way hope feels when it arrives so quietly you almost miss it. The snow began to melt. Slow at first, just little rivers cutting through the white. But the land noticed that the wind carried a different kind of cold now. Not one that bites the skin, but the kind that lives in a man's chest when he knows something is coming. Spring was near, but so was trouble. The girl, no longer frail or trembling, moved through the cabin like someone who had always belonged there, quietly, respectfully, but not fearfully. She fed the chickens, washed the floor with pine water, cut willow branches to hang by the window, for reasons she never explained. He didn't ask, he simply watched, not with desire. That kind of gaze had no place here, but with a strange, aching reverence, like he was witnessing a sunrise through the bars of his own guilt. She began speaking more broken English. Careful words. They sat together in the evenings. She on the floor by the fire, he in the rocker beside it. She told him stories, not all at once, but in pieces. A brother who played the drum and sang two birds, a mother who painted her face with red clay before praying, a father who vanished beneath soldiers' boots. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened. Sometimes he cried, but only when she wasn't looking. One night, while mending the fence, he found her by the creek. She held her hand to the sky and whispered something to the stars. When he came closer, she said softly, "Why?" Just that. Not to the sky. To him. He stopped, his breath fogged in the moonlight. "Why?" "What?" he asked, voice barely above the rustle of reeds. "Why you don't hate me? Why you help?" He leaned against the post, took a long time before answering. "Because I used to be the fire, now I'd rather be the rain." She said nothing, but something in her eyes changed, like she saw him for the first time, not just as the man who fed her, or gave her space, but as a soul with torn edges, like hers, a man who no longer wanted to conquer anything. The next morning, she cut her finger peeling potatoes. He reached for her hand on instinct. She flinched. He froze. Then gently, like wind brushing a broken wing, he held her palm and wrapped it in cloth. She didn't pull away. After that, something unspoken softened between them. She began brushing her hair near him. He left the door open when he bathed in the stream, unashamed, not to tempt, but to show there was nothing hidden anymore. She began humming songs without fear. He joined her once. His voice cracked. She smiled. It felt like church, but peace, like wildflowers, rarely blooms without catching the eye of the wrong kind of men. A rider came, not from town, but a bounty hunter, with oil-black eyes and a scar down his jaw. Said he was looking for a savage girl who'd escaped justice, said the army had put out a quiet price. "She's not yours," the rancher said. The man spat in the dirt. "She ain't yours either." The rancher stared at him with a look cold enough to freeze breath. "She is now." That night the girl disappeared. No note, no sign of struggle, just gone. Like she'd folded herself back into the wind. He searched all morning, rode past the ridge, through the pines, down to the dry creek bed, where he'd first found her. Nothing. His lungs burned. His fingers shook, not with rage, not with fear, not for himself, for her. He found her near sundown, curled in a hollow beneath the bluffs. She was bleeding, a gunshot in her side, crusted now, but angry and deep. She tried to sit up when she saw him. "Didn't want you to fight them," she whispered. He knelt beside her, his hands useless and shaking. "You think I saved you?" he asked, voice breaking. "No," she said, "I saved me. But you waited, until I could." He carried her back, like he had the first time. But this time, she clutched his coat. Not out of fear, but out of knowing. The preacher came, pale and nervous. He brought bandages and a bottle of laudanum, but avoided looking her in the eye. "She's still just a child," he muttered. The rancher said nothing. The girl, half conscious, whispered, "Not child. Not anymore." The preacher left, cross heavy in his hand, unsure what gospel he still believed in. She recovered slow, but she did recover. Every day he sat by her bedside, read from the old Bible, not for religion, but because the cadence comforted her. On the 6th day, she took his hand, held it tight. By the 10th, she was on her feet, still pale, still sore, but standing. That evening, as firelight danced on the walls, she asked, "Why didn't you leave me?" He paused, then said, "Because you are not a thing to be abandoned. You are a person to be stayed with." She placed her hand on his chest. "You're not fire anymore." He looked at her, tired, haunted, and something close to whole. "Neither, are you?" They sat side by side in the quiet. No confessions, no promises, just two souls no longer running from the weight of the past. Outside, the moon rose over the ridge, and though the world beyond, their land still burned with ignorance and violence. Inside the cabin, there was peace, not safety, not perfection, but something stronger, understanding. The wind changed again. It no longer howled, it watched. The prairie stretched quiet beneath a pale blue morning. The kind of sky that pretended peace had always lived here, as if the bloods, the bones, the burned villages, had all been stories, written in smoke and then forgotten. But the land remembers, and so did the men who couldn't let go of what they feared. The girl now walked without flinching. She wore her hair loose, not to invite touch, but to remind herself that no hands owned her anymore. She had planted seeds behind the cabin, tomatoes, onions, and wild sunflowers. They hadn't bloomed yet, but she smiled when she pressed her palms to the soil. "They'll come," she'd said. The rancher didn't know if she meant the flowers, or something else. He had started keeping a journal again, old, leather-bound thing in it. He wrote what he couldn't say aloud. He wrote of how she moved like smoke, soft, but uncatchable, how she laughed, rarely, but when she did. The cabin changed shape, how he'd once held hatred in his belly like a meal, and now he hungered only for stillness. Then came the riders, 7 of them, dusty coats, hard eyes, cold fire in their mouths. Not lawmen, not soldiers, just men who believed in fences, in blood debts, in punishing anything that reminded them of what they'd done. They didn't come fast. They came slow, like death, like fire that's been promised. The boy from town came first, riding hard, sweat streaked down his cheeks. "They're coming," said. "They'll finish what someone didn't." The rancher nodded. No panic, no anger, just acceptance and readiness. He went out back, opened a wooden box buried beneath the floorboards. Inside was a rifle wrapped in ules, kin. He cleaned it, slowly, not like a man preparing for war, like a man preparing to protect peace. The girl stood in the doorway, watching. "If I go," she said, "they won't fight." He looked up, steady. "If you leave, I've already lost." She stepped outside, placed her hand over his heart. "Then we don't run." The riders came at sunset, 7 shadows long against the dust. They stopped at the edge of the field where new roots slept beneath the soil. One of them, older, crueler, called out, "Send her out, or we take her." The rancher didn't shout, didn't raise his gun, just walked to the gate and stood with his boots planted deep in the earth. "You'll have to ride over me," he said, voice low, "and you'd better hope I fall easy." The men looked at one another. This wasn't the trembling man they expected. This was stone. This was storm made still. One reached for his holster, but another stopped him. "Ain't worth it." That one muttered, "That girl ain't hurt nobody. Let's not bleed over ghosts." One by one, they turned their horses, and the dust swallowed them whole. The rancher exhaled. Slow turned. She was still at the porch, hands clenched. When he reached her, she let go, not of fear, but of waiting. That night, they ate soup by the fire, shared stories, not painful ones, simple ones. He told her of a boyhood treehouse that collapsed the day it was finished. She told him of a deer she once followed for 3 days just to learn how it breathed. They laughed, not loudly, but deeply, like people who no longer expected pain to come with joy. The next morning, she brought him a gift, a bird, carved from oak, its wings open, its beak pointing skyward. He took it with reverence. "It's you," she said, "when you wait, not when you fight." He placed it above the door, so it would see every sunrise first. The boy kept visiting. She taught him Apache words. He taught her how to whistle. They made each other laugh. The rancher watched from a distance, his heart full in ways he didn't know hearts could be. The preacher returned, older now, quieter. He didn't speak of sin or salvation. He only brought seeds, left them on the porch with a note. "A fence keeps things out. A garden lets them grow. You chose right." Seasons turned. The flowers bloomed behind the cabin. The girl grew stronger. She didn't just survive. She rooted. The rancher aged, but he no longer felt hollow. He had learned that redemption doesn't come like lightning. It comes like spring, subtle, patient, unfolding. One evening, they sat on the porch, sun slipping low, the sky painted gold and lavender. She turned to him. "You never asked my name." He smiled. "Didn't need it to know you." She laughed, then said it. Finally, one word, soft, like a bell in fog. He repeated it, careful, honoring it, then whispered, "Thank you." She looked at him then, not like a child, not like a victim, but like someone who had chosen her own tomorrow. "You didn't save me," she said. "You waited. That's better." They sat like that, two souls on a porch, beneath a sky that no longer needed to forgive, because it had never blamed, and in the hush between wind and dusk, something eternal passed between them. Not love the way songs tell it, but something deeper, something earned,